Welcome to the Octavius Gould Experience, and I am your host, Octavius Gould. And I have the pleasure today of having a fantastic guest that I think you all will find extremely compelling, Ed Miller, who is the president of Pro Tapes out of New Jersey. Welcome to the podcast episode. Ed, how are you today?
Hey, Octavius, I'm great, man. How you doing?
Ed, I'm doing well. Beginning of the year, we're out of the holidays, and I am trying to stay in fifth gear and just be epic for this new year. No resolutions, just goals that I'm trying to focus on. How about you?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I just had a conversation back at work. You take a couple weeks off between Christmas and New Year's, and you think of all the things you've got to kind of get accomplished in the new year. So you come in like 6 in the morning because that first Monday back in the office, and it's not even like midday Tuesday, and I'm already burnt out. I got to pace myself, but I'm excited. I'm excited for the new year.
Well, Ed, back in the day, I used to work through the holiday season and, try to just get ahead of the curve and get from behind the eight ball. Now I do focus a little bit more on work-life balance. So I may take maybe 2 days off, if that.
Right, wait, no, I'm excited about that. Like I said, I think we got a lot of exciting things on the horizon here at Pro Tapes. And personally speaking, just kind of as I'm transitioning my career a little bit and kind of coincides with what you do, moving more into helping people personally develop, professionally develop, and do more coaching. So that's why I was excited to speak with you here today.
Well, Ed, I am excited for many reasons. And when I talk about your background, there's tremendous alignment between you and I, both of us being Jersey guys, although you're still there, not having to pump your gas like I do on a regular basis. So, Ed, let's start with taking us back to the beginning. Ed, take us back to when you were a young football player that I am really excited to learn about before your NFL dream became reality. Who you were, what your goals and aspirations were, because I'm quite sure it may have been different than what it turned out to be.
Yeah, I think just kind of looking back though, nowadays if you look at high school, there's so much of this red shirting going on in high school even where people are held back so they can kind of mature a little more physically. Or in my case, I turned 18 literally in summer camp at Pitt when I went to Pitt. So I was a young 17-year-old when I left for school and kind of looking back. I wish I had a lot of strategic planning that went into it, and I really didn't. I mean, I was very fortunate to kind of achieve some of the things I was able to achieve without much of a plan going into Pitt. Now, I kind of developed a plan while I was there, and as I matured a little more mentally. But I think when I kind of look back, I scratch my head and wonder how I was able to kind of have some of the success I did without much of a plan going in. And I think that's one of the things that I make a point of now is doing more pre-planning than I used to kind of do when I was a younger kid.
And Ed, you talked about playing at Pitt as a collegiate athlete after a stellar high school career in New Jersey. You and I both played college football, and the one thing that I remember is someone coming into, at that point in time, it was the Police Athletic League, and telling me, hey, listen, out of the 40 to 50 of you young athletes, only 1% may even make it to college. And maybe not even any of you will make it to the NFL for many reasons, various reasons. I can remember sitting there and hearing that speech and saying, well, I got to be that 1%. I got to be that 1%. And then obviously getting hurt in college and my career ending prematurely, you were able to go through high school, go through college, have a successful playing career at the University of Pittsburgh, and then make it to the NFL. What was that experience like? Take us back to that moment when you got drafted.
Yeah, my college career was kind of speckled with injuries. So I had a knee reconstruction. So to kind of get to the NFL after having some of those setbacks for injury was sort of just like accomplishing a goal. I was back then they had 12 rounds in the NFL draft. So I was an 11th out of 12 round draft pick. So the chances of making a team for me weren't really high, but I think basically I accomplished the goal of overcoming some significant injuries and still being able to get into the NFL level. Um, be honest with you, I didn't have aspirations of a long career. I was just kind
Mhm.
of happy to have accomplished that goal of getting drafted. Um, Looking back at it again, I wish I kind of understood what I was going through a little more at the time, but I was just so focused on recovering from injuries and getting back to playing at Pitt my
Right.
senior year. So we had a good, successful senior year. Both as a team, we were successful. We were played in a bowl game, being drafted. So I mean, it was just kind of like checking off some things off a box as far as overcoming some things from a resilience standpoint. So again, I didn't have aspirations of a long NFL career. I knew the odds against that were pretty high, and I knew I was going to have to use my lessons that I learned through sports in my professional career, whatever my life's work was going to be at that time. But I just kind of, like I said, I really just enjoyed being able to get the opportunity to go to San Diego. I got drafted by the Chargers. I think where a lot of people were kind of graduating and trying to go on to work, I got at least to spend a couple of years pursuing my NFL dream. And San Diego is not a bad place to do it.
Oh, a great place. You know, you have Green Bay and Chicago playing this week in the playoffs. You could have been at one of those spots. And when you think about that collegiate career and NFL career, and you reflect on it today, what lessons stand out most that still show up in not only your life, but also your business leadership as well?
Yeah, I think to football in particular, obviously it's a large organization, right? So if you're
Mhm.
looking at it on a college roster, you probably have 80, 85 scholarship players,
Mhm.
assistant coaches, trainers, equipment managers. So it's a very large, complex organization.
Mhm.
And you've got all these different people in these different roles contributing to one goal, right? That's the success
Right.
of the team. In the NFL, it's probably what 50, I don't know what they're up to now, 53 man rosters or whatever. But at the
Right.
end of the day, they're large, complex organizations made up of a lot of diverse people. That's an
Mhm.
interesting thing. You get exposed to a lot of diversity in the sense now you're playing with people who are from the country, from urban settings, different parts of the country, different backgrounds. So you have to learn to communicate and work well with diverse people. You've got to understand what your individual contribution means to the overall goals of the organization. And when you start being able to connect the similarities between being part of a team, I talk, we talk about coaching. In order to be a good coach, you have to be coachable, right? So you
Right.
kind of look back and you see as yourself as a team member being coached, how coachable were you and what kind of lessons did you learn? You got to be a good teacher, right? And in order to be a good teacher, you had to be a good student. So I think there's so many parallels between not just playing football, the personal things, like you said, you have to be prepared, you have to be resilient, you have to have all those characteristics of a successful athlete, but to be part of a successful organization, a contributing member, you have to understand how all this complexity fits together. And I think that's all transferable to when you get into the corporate world and join a corporate organization.
Absolutely. I agree 100%, Ed. How did football shape your understanding of things such as discipline, accountability, and preparation that is really key, especially as we approach the beginning of 2026?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on some pretty bad teams. I've been on some pretty good teams. And I've played with, some Hall of Famers in the NFL, and you've kind of watched how certain people who were really ultra successful at the highest level and how they prepared and conducted themselves. And you kind of look at some other people who were just as talented, but just didn't have the discipline, and the characteristics that the successful people have. So you can kind of sort through, hey, why was this team not successful? Why was this person successful and this one wasn't? When you kind of compare them physically, they were very similar. But
Right.
what was the differentiation between the two? And it generally comes down to little things like somebody was disciplined, and somebody wasn't, right? What are you willing to do that you don't want to do in order to be successful? And what do you need to avoid that you don't want to avoid in order to be successful, right? We all like to go out, have some beers, have some fun with our friends, but to be able to sacrifice doing that for the things that you have to get up early, go lift, right? Go ahead and put your film study in, preparing for the next thing. A lot of those things are things you don't want to do, but you have to
Mhm.
do, right?
Right.
And that's where the discipline comes in. And
Yeah.
that's very similar to the business world.
Ed, we continuously watch on the news, read in the newspaper, or even online now, the number of athletes who unfortunately struggle to pursue their dreams or to move forward and progress within their next phase of their lives after sports, whether it be because of getting injured prematurely in their career ending, or even after retirement, even if they're a Hall of Famer. How did you navigate that transition from player to the professional corporate world? And what advice can you give some of these young athletes or even some of these professional athletes who are on the brink of retirement, who are about to take that same path as yourself?
Yeah, I think a big part of that becomes your identity. In other words, some people identify as a football player, right? And I think once you get the realization of understanding that football or any sport is something you do, it's not who you are, right? And I think there's people who build their identity around being a football player, and the minute that game ends for them, their identity is shattered. They have no identity at that point. And I think to understand at some point that the game ends for everybody, no matter who you are. So you could go into one training camp and last 2 weeks, or you could last 20 years. At the end of the day, the game ends, and you make that transition from football player to whatever the next phase of life is. I think being able to understand that and say, okay, look, this is something I've done. These are the lessons I've learned, and these are the characteristics I've developed as someone who was a football player, but that's not my identity. That's just something I did. And these skills are now transferable. I take them with me into whatever I do going forward. So, like we said, those characteristics, when you kind of say, what are your first principles or what do you build yourself around? Discipline is certainly a big one, right? How do you do these repetitive tasks over and over that probably aren't really enjoyable, but somehow you convince yourself to make them enjoyable, right?
Right.
You got to love the grind, right? You got to embrace the grind. And I think once you kind of do that and they become a habit, that's where you really sort of take it off and make yourself successful and start separating yourself from everybody else.
We all have a competitive mindset as an athlete. Once you transition into corporate America, how did your competitive mindset evolve once success wasn't measured by stats or on the scoreboard to make sure that you were still achieving your goals?
No, that's a great question. I think listen, I was an offensive lineman, right? And the only time you'll ever hear an offensive lineman on television is when he does something wrong, right? He gets a holding penalty or missed the block, and that's how you're going to hear about him. But when they do their job well, you don't hear anything about them. So you kind of come into the professional world already with that offensive lineman mentality of I don't need to be recognized necessarily for things, but you're still quietly competitive, right? So to be able to succeed without having to be showered with praise or notoriety is something that helps you kind of suppress an ego. And that's a real key to being successful in this world is trying to suppress that ego, but balance that, right? You need pride in what you want to do, and so that's kind of like a double-edged sword. You don't want to have too much pride
Right.
where it kind of stymies your progress, but you want to have enough pride, but you want to have that quiet pride, that satisfaction that you've achieved something that you set for yourself without having to everybody in the organization kind of tell you what a great job you did. So when you approach everything with that mentality of the team first, quiet contributions to the greater good of the organization, I think that's what really makes uh, athletes in particular, people who could kind of master that, very successful in the corporate world.
Ed, you've been serving as president of Pro Tapes for over 20 years, which is really impressive. What leadership principles help you sustain that level of success for so long?
I think the biggest thing is to be able to establish a culture and get everybody aligned, right? So when you're kind of looking at things, you start off with a mission, right? Here's our mission, here's our vision for our organization. Um, so I think you've got to establish that first. Then you turn around as what's the strategy that helps get everybody to that vision, that mission, and then what are the resources required, right? So as someone who's in a leadership role, what you're trying to do is bring people into the organization that have common characteristics that are going to contribute to your core values as an organization. So again, it doesn't mean everybody comes in with the same skills, but they have the same core values, right? And
Hmm.
that's kind of what you look for when you interview people. Like you say, you want to get the right people on the bus in the right seats, and you want to get the wrong people off the bus, right? People that are counter to the culture you're trying to create. So if you're saying, hey, look, we're a customer obsessed, team oriented culture, then you need people who understand that they need to put the benefit of everyone ahead of their own personal well-being. But you need to balance that, right? You need to recognize what good performance is. You need to reward people adequately, but you also have to make sure everyone's aware that there's the greater group is at the above of everyone, and your customers are above that, right? So
Right.
that's what you're looking for, is when you're interviewing, training, and developing people, that at the end of the day, we're all kind of linked by the same cultures.
I was on a podcast episode a few months ago, Ed, and I was talking about my early days as a sales director at MCI Telecommunications. We didn't know about things such as emotional intelligence. It was all about leave your personal business at the door and focus on the task at hand. How has your leadership style evolved from your early years as president of Pro Tapes to today?
The biggest thing I learned, like a lot of people, it's trial and error, right? You learn from your
Mhm.
mistakes. At least I hope people learn from their mistakes. Um, First, buying into Pro Tape as an investor and then taking over the leadership of Pro Tape. Um, when I first got here as a young hard charger, I was more of a top down guy, like trying to more or less say, hey,
Mhm.
this is what we're going to do. And I didn't lead with a why. I didn't spend enough time explaining why we needed to do something or make some
Mhm.
of the changes that we made. And looking back on it, I think I could have got buy-in a lot quicker. So again, trying to force things down through an organization. Sometimes I think, again, as a new leader, for example, you're thinking, hey, I'm being brought into this position because I have this skill or this knowledge, and I'm supposed to tell everybody what to do. And you learn quickly that's probably the worst thing you can do. What you need to do is establish a why and a common vision and get people to buy into that vision and feel like they're contributing to that success. And you're a servant leader, right? You're not
Mhm.
sitting here waiting for a bunch of people to do things for you. What you become is, quite frankly, the largest babysitter in the world. You run around getting people the resources of what they need to accomplish things. So literally walk around and you say, how are you doing? What can I do to help you accomplish whatever the task is at hand? So whether it's training, whether it's capital investment in equipment, you find out very, very quickly that you're just basically running around taking care of the whole organization, which is great, right? And as long as the organization is achieving everything that you've all set out to do, you start realizing real quicker. I wish I would have started there with a servant leader mentality as opposed to a top down approach. Now it took me about 2 or 3 years to understand it's much better to start off explaining why we need to do something. And it's, you get there a lot quicker. So sometimes that's that old adage, you measure twice and cut once. I think if you spend a little more time up front explaining the why, even if you have to explain it multiple times,
Right.
different ways to different people, in the long run, you'll get much better results.
I agree 100%. As a coach, I talk about that topic, the why, every week, week in and week out. Ed, how do you develop leaders within Pro Tape rather than just developing and managing performance?
That's another good question. I think part of that is to get people that want to be developed, right? We talked about, the difference of being a good coach and being coachable, right? So you have to learn to be coachable first
Right.
before you could be a good coach. So before you could start developing people, you have to have people that want to be developed, right? And developing doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I just want a higher position in the organization to make more money. It's people that, look, money is a great motivator to a point.
Right.
Then it becomes, how can I contribute at a higher level? How can I develop more skills? So those are the people that are coming up asking for those opportunities,
Hmm.
that you want to recognize that and you want to invest your time in developing them. And I tell people all the time, it's not like when you're in these development roles, it's not what you know, it's what you can transfer to other people, right? So you could be a really intelligent person, very knowledgeable with a lot of experience. But if you're not a good teacher and you don't understand or don't know how to transfer that knowledge to
Hmm.
other people in your organization, then you're not necessarily in a position to help develop people,
Right.
right? So I think that's really the main skill, is to be able to have more of an empathetic view of saying, look, I remember when I was in that role,
Mhm.
and I wish my boss or my mentor or the person training me would have approached me this way. So I kind of try to bring that into it. So it's identifying people who are anxious to be developed, and then being able to just extract from them where they think their weaknesses lie, and being able to lead them into, like, kind of filling blind spots for them, right? That's the other big key, is it's a
Mhm.
blind spot for a reason. You're not aware of it. And a lot of the people that I work with, what I try to do is point out the blind spots in a positive, constructive manner, not in a way that makes them want to avoid addressing it. Because that's another thing. When some people have a weakness, their tendency is to run from that weakness as opposed to
Mhm.
run to it. And the only way you could ever fix it is by running to it and just hitting it head on.
Yeah. One of the things I was really impressed with, Ed, when we met a few months ago for the first time, was your coach-like mentality. So many leaders, whether they're a frontline manager, senior leader, or a C-suite executive, utilize the excuse for not coaching and developing people within their organization based on lack of time. And one of the things that I picked up from you immediately was your commitment to excellence and your ability to focus on what's truly important, and that's coaching and developing the people within your organization. How has that impacted the success of ProTape, and more importantly, the success of the people within your organization?
Yeah. When we look back, and I look back at ProTape's evolution, right? And that's kind of what I look at it, is going back as a small family run company that
Hmm.
grew very rapidly. And one of the things you realize, the importance of succession planning, right? And a lot of people
Hmm.
talk about succession planning, and you kind of put together an org chart. Okay, when this guy goes, here's who will fill it. But succession planning means you have to have people prepared to hit the ground running when it's their time to take that seat over.
Hmm.
And frankly, it also means you have to empower and trust the people that you have designated for these seats to go ahead and do the job, and not sit there and try to tell them everything to do, but have them in a position to where they could come in and basically, if they need you as a sounding board, or
Hmm.
they, hey, Octavius, I think I want to go this way, and here's why. And you could kind of say, yeah, lead them in the right direction, but you're not telling them what to do.
Right.
So I think over the last 3 years, as our company has evolved and developed, we had to prepare for that succession plan, which is really in gear right now. So we had two key retirements last year. We've got some other people that are within that window, or 2 or 3 years of retirement. So it's exciting for me to watch these people now step into those roles, and they're very well prepared to succeed, but also to continue to help them. And now you've got this new group of leadership where you have some new people from outside the organization coming in. So
Hmm.
you're trying to blend the two cultures together a little bit, or keep the culture evolving, right? Just
Hmm.
because something was successful for us for a long, long time doesn't mean we got to maintain that. Sometimes you want to tweak it a little bit, or add a couple elements to your culture. We were a privately held company. We were acquired by SureTape Technologies 4 years ago. Being part of a larger enterprise is interesting, because you have a lot more. You got to kind of almost take your ProTape blinders off, right, and start
Right.
looking at things. So now you're training people who were very successful just concentrating on ProTape, and now they've got to be part of this bigger organization. So again, getting them to evolve into that kind of a mindset has been exciting to watch.
And as you know, especially as an offensive lineman, even more than a running back like myself, football teaches us how to respond after getting knocked down.
Hmm.
How has that mindset helped you navigate adversity as a senior leader?
Yeah, I think in particular, if you kind of look back, you had the financial crisis back in 08, 09, and we had just expanded and moved into a building. So, I mean, that was like a
Hmm.
catastrophe waiting to happen. Then you had the response to
Hmm.
COVID. So you had some of these elements where, I mean, honestly, I felt invigorated by the challenges, right? You
Hmm.
kind of want to step up and meet a challenge. Scary times, uncertain times, but again,
Hmm.
when you're a resilient person in your mindset, and again, you have to develop certain mindsets to be successful in athletics that are portable, that that are, they're going to work with you no matter what you're doing, right? Whether you're in
Hmm.
sales, or whether you're in football, or whatever it is, if you understand to put things in categories of controllables and things that aren't under your control, right? I'm going to block out the noise of the things we can't control. So
Mhm.
things like a pandemic and not knowing when it's going to end, I can't control that, but I can control the things within our ability to manage our expenses and kind
Mhm.
of protect our people and do all the things that you're supposed to do as a good company, turn your inventory quick, have good control on your costs. So all
Mhm.
those things are within your control, and you got to block out the noise of the things that aren't. That's applicable to sports, that's applicable to business. And that's the same thing when people talk all the time is less focus on the result you desire and more developing the process and understanding what that process is, and then having the discipline to come in every day and follow the process. And if you do that, at the end of the day, the result's going to be what you want it to be, but you're not focusing on that, right? Just,
Right.
I always try to say, like a baseball player doesn't go to the plate and say, I'm going to hit a home run. He goes to the plate and says, okay, I'm going to watch the release point of the pitcher. I'm going to try to
Mhm.
guess, what he's throwing. I'm going to keep my eye on the ball, a nice level, easy swing, and the result is the home run. So all the process, those several components of a baseball player hitting a ball are what you need to be concentrating on. And that's the same thing in business. Sometimes we get involved with things we can't control and outside noise, and it's just drains you emotionally, it drains your energy, and it's just a waste of time. So I think really that's the key is try to get people to focus on the controllables.
Exactly. That's a hard task sometimes, Ed, right?
Even for myself, I got to remind myself every day when I'm in traffic.
Hey, I lived in Atlanta for 22 years. Don't talk about traffic in New
Yeah,
Jersey.
I agree.
Ed, when you think about failure, whether it's in business or sports, is something that you have to deal with on a regular basis, if not for yourself, for the people who you serve as a servant leader, as you mentioned. What's the one leadership failure that taught you more than any success ever has?
That's a great question. I think you don't really fail completely, uh, only fail completely if you don't extract the lessons from that, right?
Mhm.
And I think some of it is what I touched on earlier is I guess coming in and not explaining the why
Mhm.
adequately or often enough to our team, trying to drive things down through the organization instead of pulling them up through the organization. Valuing empathy more than I do now. I didn't do
Mhm.
as much then. So I just think a lot of it just comes with maturity, mellowing a little bit. I think, when you, again, part of football, sometimes you can be a hard charger and demand stuff out of people without, again, getting them motivated or explaining why you're demanding these things from them. There's good coaches. I'm sure you've had the screamers and the yellers, and then you've had the guys that are good teachers. And I think understanding that there's different horses for different tracks, right? You can't approach everyone with the same motivation tactics. You have to sort of build relationships with people. And that's really, really important. I think if I were to give anybody advice on anything, is take the time to build relationships with people because then you understand what their motivating factors are and you could have more empathy and it just makes it easier for everybody involved.
And as a leader at any level, you know that it's easy to make decisions when everything is laid out in front of you and the data is right there for you to peruse and review. How do you make tough decisions when the stakes are high, but that level of uncertainty is truly real?
No, I think you touched on it there with data. I think in a lot of cases, organizations don't do enough in terms of gathering data and understanding data.
Mhm.
And then I think in a lot of cases, especially at my age now, I think there are younger people at more middle management levels who have a much better understanding of data than I do, right?
Right.
And just because I'm the president of Pro Tapes doesn't mean that I'm any more knowledgeable than someone at one of those positions that's really deep in the data and really understands the data better than I do, right? So I have to be able to let that person feel emotionally secure enough and give them enough confidence that they could step up and tell me I'm wrong if I'm going down the wrong road and be able to accept that because they have the data to back up what they're saying, right? So to be a data-driven organization, you have to have the ability to understand, I don't know everything. I'm not as well versed in particular data, depending on what it is within the company. But in a lot of cases, you want to defer to your product managers, purchasing agents, people who are deeper in the weeds when it comes to understanding the data than I am, right? And as long as someone could put something factual in front of me and help me make a good decision, and again, I don't like to make decisions by consensus. I don't want everyone agreeing. You want people to disagree and have respectful disagreements, but you want to make the right decision, right? You just don't want to make the popular decisions. And that's, I think, what you touched on is the key is if you don't have the data, you better develop systems to get the correct data.
Great point. Great point. When I'm coaching executives and leaders, and I often tell them they have to develop a level of courage to challenge assumptions. What you talked about led me to believe that you are actually trusting the people who you put in the positions to provide you with information, but to also challenge your assumptions. What would you say to younger, less experienced leaders who lack that level of confidence or uh, confidence or experience to go in and challenge assumptions of the people who they report to?
Well, I think it starts with, like you said, is developing a emotionally safe, whatever you want to call it, where people don't feel like, hey, if I ask a question, that's a dumb question, I'm not going to ask it, right? So they'll sit in meetings, and you know, I always say, look, there's kind of four agreements. There's a book to four agreements, but I like to apply them to business, right? One is never assume, be impeccable with your word, always do the best you can, and never take anything personally, right?
Mhm.
So apply those four agreements to your life, to business. So one of the things, if you're sitting in a room, don't assume that everyone understands what you're saying. And don't sit back and say, well, I'm going to walk out of there and I'll ask Ed on the side because I felt like I'd feel be like if I'm stupid if I raise my hand and ask that question. Because you'll be shocked that there's probably six other people sitting there with that same question that didn't have the courage to ask it either, right? So you want to make it an emotionally safe space where people could ask for clarifications on things and encourage that. Once you kind of build that culture where people feel comfortable being able to exchange ideas and ask questions, then they have the courage to challenge assumptions or put forth a maybe a contrary way to do something, right? Not just go along with it. Like I said, too many times organizations think the way to do it is to have a consensus. Everybody has to agree that we're going to go in this direction. That's not the case. I think what you want to do is have the right direction you're going into, and it'll become clear to the people who dissented pretty quickly, like, okay, that's what I was missing. And now you get everyone buying in because the success is starting to demonstrate that that was the correct decision.
Yeah.
And conversely, sometimes people are too married to decisions and they start going down a road and they realize, ooh, things aren't turning out the way I thought they were, but they've got too much pride or, hey, we were already invested in this software. So we're going to, keep cut your losses, admit you were wrong, remember it for next time so you don't make the same mistake again. But again, don't be married to decisions, especially when the evidence starts demonstrating we made the wrong one.
Exactly. Ed, you just talked about some leaders having too much pride. Many leaders also have huge egos, and it's important to have a balanced ego, obviously. What keeps you grounded when your level of responsibility and pressure increases at that C-suite level?
Yeah, I mean, I think being an offensive lineman was really useful to me. I think if you just think about every time your name is being mentioned, it's in the context of what you did wrong, and every time you're successful, there's nothing. It's crickets, right? So I guess you could say, hey, as long as if all's quiet on the Western Front, I'm doing a good job. So you kind of almost get used to that mentality. What's more important is to realize not everyone else has that mentality, right? And just because you're used not to being told you're doing a good job, or you're being told in a very small setting, right? The offensive line meeting room where your coach is telling you what a great job you did, and maybe 12 other linemen are the only people that heard it, doesn't mean everyone has that same mentality. So it's important to recognize that people like to be told they're doing a good job. They like to be recognized publicly. They like to be complimented, even if it's just privately, one-on-one. So I've got to understand that just because I have that mentality doesn't mean everyone else does,
Mhm.
and kind of remind myself of that.
Right. when you think about your leadership and the legacy that you want to leave at ProTape, what is it that you hope people say about you?
That I was generous
Mhm.
not just with compensation and rewarding people, but generous with my time. I want people to think that I cared about them beyond just what we did here in terms of work, but
Mhm.
outside of work. I think like I talked about the importance of building relationships, and relationships mean you have to invest in knowing your people personally. What are their hobbies? What are their interests? What are their family structures? When things aren't going well for them,
Mhm.
what were you able to do to help make their, lighten their load a little bit? And what were you able to do to help them? So I think, especially this past holiday, you get a couple people reach out to you in retirement now, and other people that have some issues, and they drop you a little note or write something in a Christmas card, and it kind of makes you feel really good that, okay, I'm on the right path. I think I'm doing what I set out to do.
Mhm. Exactly. Being a leader for some people is really important. I know a lot of frontline managers, they want that VP title and they're so focused on the title. But once you get there and you're in that seat and you own that responsibility, you realize that there are things that matter so much more than a title. Speak to that as it relates to what young leaders should be really truly focusing on beyond the title to be impactful.
Yeah, that's another great question, and I think really what it is, as at the end of the day, you realize it's the impact you've had on people's lives.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times, I mean, that's the expression. I'm probably messing it up, but they don't remember necessarily what you said, but they remember how you made them feel, right? So, as a leader of an organization and someone that puts an emphasis on building relationships, it's really how you made them feel. Rewards in terms of climbing within a corporate structure, titles, compensation. Like I said, that's nice, but it dissipates over time.
Mhm.
And really, what sticks with you is the impact you've had on people's lives. And again, I'm kind of at that stage of my career now where I kind of look back at people who've reported to me at different points in times. You talk about coaching trees, right? How many of these coaches worked under Bill Belichick or Bill Walsh or whatever, and you go and you see all these other successful
Right.
coaches that they helped produce. Now I could kind of look back in our organization or our industry and see people leading other industries or went on to build successful businesses themselves. And these are people that were part of my team at different points in time. So
Mhm.
there's a quiet satisfaction in that I had at least contributed in part to some of their successes.
And so many organizations have mission statements and value statements posted on the walls, but they don't walk the walk or talk the talk. How do you ensure that your leaders at ProTape stay connected to the mission of ProTape as they progress within their career?
I think the most important thing, Octavius, is modeling the behaviors that you
Mhm.
want to see in your organization. I think a lot of times, like you said, people say one thing but then act a different way. And really, the key is to model the behaviors you're looking for. So, and sometimes I do it in a sarcastic, funny way. But when you see an exchange, like one of our key core values is respect, right?
Mhm.
And then you'll see an email exchange or an exchange in a meeting, and you might want to say, well, was that respectful? Just
Right.
kind of, in a key little, you know, kind of off the record way of saying that's not you're not modeling our behaviors. Now, who sits there and says, well, Octavius, you're not modeling the behaviors. No, you just
Right.
say, walk, like you said, walk the walk. Or hey, a customer's on hold for you, and you say, I'll call him back tomorrow. Is
Mhm.
that customer obsessed? That's another one of our core values. So you're going to point that out. That's not customer obsession, telling someone you'll call them back tomorrow when you're right there. So it's just pointing it out to the individual that you're not modeling, you're not walking the walk all the time. And you know what? Every once in a while, you need to have bottom up core values, right? Again, these can't, you're not Moses coming down with the 10 Commandments and saying these are what we're going to follow. You have to have an organization that contributed to those core values, right? And everybody said, oh, look, these are the things that we collectively agreed are important to kind of have the culture we want to every day wake up and say, oh shit, I got to go to work? Or do you wake up every day and go, hey, I can't wait to get to work and, see my friends or see people I have good relationships with? And one of the things that tells me we did the right thing was during the pandemic, I couldn't keep people out of the building. I had the opposite problem, right? And to this day, companies still can't get people back in. We never had that problem. People really look forward to coming to work, to be around one another. And I think that's kind of a good example that we're on the right track when it came to building a strong culture.
And in talking about that culture at Pro Tapes, I had the opportunity to speak to some of your team members and some of the employees when I was visiting your headquarters on two different occasions. And I felt this vibe that people enjoyed working there. They enjoyed being there, as you just touched on. How did you go about, or what are the steps that you continuously take to ensure that you're maintaining a culture that is conducive to success?
Yeah. I think again, if you're saying we value transparency as an organization, then how do you demonstrate that, right? And part of that is to have town hall meetings where you're showing your financial results on a quarterly basis and you're talking about strategic changes coming to the organization. You're taking the time to kind of provide that information. Look, reading a balance sheet isn't easy, and I'm not going to stand up here with a balance sheet, but you want to be able to tell people, hey, I always call that our scoreboard. Are we winning or losing? And if you're looking at the scoreboard, are we hitting our numbers? Are we making the profit we did, we budgeted to make this year? Sharing that, being transparent with the employees. If you're saying, hey, we're accessible, approachable, right? My door's always open. Is that true, or is someone coming in to see you and you're kind of waving them off? No, I think we do a good job of intentionally walking the walk when it comes to those things and demonstrating that, being able to point to it. Now, some people might come up and complain and say, hey, you're not being transparent. You can say, well, we're being transparent in this meeting and that meeting, point out examples of when you were. It might be in a particular area where maybe we didn't communicate as clearly as we could have. That's great. Point that out and we'll correct it. But to make a blanket indictment that we're not transparent, you don't get a lot of people doing that. Sometimes they'll complain we're not as transparent on a particular situation, and we'll correct that. But I think overall, like you feel here, the things that are important: transparency, respect, uh, treating people well, compensating them well, treating them well. I think those are the things, we always are looking to improve and do better, but I think you'll get by and large, everybody feels we do those things consistently well.
Ed, I talked to so many frontline managers, middle managers who possess the competencies and skills to climb the corporate ladder, but they lack the patience, not waiting, but how they respond as I communicate to them during that waiting period. What would you say to some of those professionals around the country who may not necessarily be where they covet today and not see the opportunities, but need to still work on developing their skills and having a growth mindset to get to the level that you achieve?
Yeah, I think really comes down to playing the long game as opposed to
Mhm.
the short game, right? And I think we're in a instant gratification society. Everybody wants what they want when they want it. Um, my advice to a lot of people, even sometimes if you've got to take a step backward. So let's just say you're on the organization and you're at a particular mid-management level. Sometimes people could look at a vertical move as, well, it's vertical. I'm not, it's not going forward. But if you're learning a new skill set and you're being exposed to something new that you didn't have prior experience in, that's valuable. And people sometimes don't always equate the value of learning something new and gaining a new experience with value, but it really is more valuable in a lot of cases than a $5,000 a year raise, for example, right?
Right.
So sometimes you kind of look at that and say, look, in the long run, this new experience or being exposed to this new skill that you didn't have before, you might have only had a hammer and a screwdriver in your toolbox. Now you got a saw, right? Now you're able to be more well-rounded, you're able to be more marketable, even if it's not within this organization. You got to be able to explain people the value in playing the long game versus the short immediate gratification game.
Exactly. And Ed, as you look at hiring senior leaders or have over the past, what competencies and skills do you look at to ensure that you're hiring the right people that you can trust and hand the keys to?
Yeah, I mean, hire. I mean, we've gone through a lot of different methods to hire. It's a crapshoot. It really is. But I think one of the things that I like to look for in individuals are people that are anxious to learn or have a real craving to learn new things. So you kind of want people who are readers, which is, believe it or not, very rare. So you go into an interview. One question I always like to ask is, "What's the last book you read? And what did you learn from the book?" And you'd be surprised how many people can't tell you the last book they read. Or what kind of podcasts do you listen to? Again, what are you demonstrating outside of work that you're kind of a curious person who's looking to add to their skill sets? Because that's really what you want at the end of the day, is someone that's coming in that's eager to learn, right? It doesn't mean sometimes you get people that it's tough to teach them. You have to maybe approach them 3 or 4 different ways before they finally catch on to something. That's fine as long as you're willing to learn. Then you've got other people who come in and think they know it all, right? Hey, you hired me to do this job. Why, or what do I need to learn things? I'm sure you probably learn this all the time. Like, it cracks me up. The higher people go in organizations, the less training they think they need, and it's the opposite. And you sit back and, like, people who fight coaching, and they sit back and say, "Well, what do I need a coach for? I've been successful for 20 years." You sit back and say, well, Tiger Woods had a swing coach. Tom Brady had a quarterback coach. Who the hell are you that you don't need a coach? Everybody needs a coach. And I think the coaching piece, whether it's a full-time coach, you go on the outside of the organization, or just someone that, let's call them a mentor within the organization, someone that could point out a blind spot, someone that could show you something or teach you something you didn't previously know. That's where the ego comes into it, and you got to kill that ego. And I think that's really the key to it. When you're looking for people that you could kind of almost say, this person doesn't have a huge ego and this person is really interested in learning, those are the people you want to put on your team.
Ed, as we wrap up this fantastic episode, I just have to take a moment to give your spouse and you some kudos. While I was preparing for this episode, I told you preparedness is key. So I did my research. And one of the things I read about was truly inspiring and impressive is the fact that you and your wife donated $1 million to the NIL at the University of Pitt. To be respectful of your time, I still want to give you an opportunity to at least touch on what that truly meant to you two and the university's athletic department.
Yeah, I think looking back at the foundation of some of the skills and characteristics that I was able to develop that I think helped me be successful in the corporate world, I attribute to my time at Pitt, right? I think I had a great high school coach, Bob Taylor, and I learned a lot from there. And then I played for some great coaches at Pitt. Joe Moore, who the best offensive line in college football, receives the Joe Moore Award, the late Joe Moore. And I had an opportunity to play for Joe Moore for a couple of years. And while you're going through it, you don't understand it and you certainly don't appreciate it. But those are lessons and skills that you take with you for the rest of your life. Like I said, they're transferable and they apply in every facet of your life. So when I look back, I think it's really important to support or pay it back. That's number one. Number two, I have a passion for Pitt football. I mean, when you think about things you could get involved with, there's very few things that get a visceral response where you're going to scream at your TV. So I want to do what I can to help assure that Pitt's successful. But more importantly, I want to make sure I don't forget where I came from. And I still have great relationships with a lot of people I played with to this day, some 40 years later, 35, 40 years later. I go out to a couple games every year and get to see my old buddies, and it's really great and makes me feel good.
Ed, absolutely awesome. One of the many reasons why I have tremendous respect for you and appreciation. So I am just really grateful that you joined my podcast episode today. Thank you for your time. Have a successful 2026, my friend.
I appreciate it, man. I enjoyed it, and stay in touch, man. I look forward to speaking with you more frequently.
Thank you. Well, for my audience, thank you for tuning in. Whether you're watching or listening to this podcast episode, you can find Ed Miller on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. Follow him. He has a blog as well. He talks about coaching, development, and leadership. Please hit like and subscribe to my podcast episodes so you can be alerted to future guests who will be great and compelling as Ed was. Have a great day, everyone. Have an epic 2026. Thank you.